Pull a child's dinosaur book off one shelf and an old book of dragons off another and lay them side by side. Find me the line where one stops and the other starts. You're going to struggle. And if that lack of a clear line doesn't bother you, then what about this? The word dinosaur is only 184 years old. For every century before that, when somebody dug up a giant horned skull or watched something huge slide into a river and ran home shaking, they reached for an older word, a different word in every language, from strangers who couldn't possibly have compared notes, and every one of them naming the same animal. We have a single word for that animal now: dragon. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. So here's the actual question on the table. If a dragon was nothing but a myth, a thing somebody made up around the fire, then why does almost every culture on Earth have one? Why do people who've never met, who couldn't possibly have compared notes, all describe the same family of animal in the same handful of shapes, and then reach for the same kind of word to name it? There's one answer that covers all of that at once, and it's the one we're going to put to the test. That a dragon was never a fantasy in the first place. It was the old word for an animal we now dig out of the ground and call a dinosaur. And there's one more piece, and it's the hinge that this whole episode swings on. We're taught as flat, settled fact that the last dinosaur died 66 million years before the first human ever drew breath. So the two could never have crossed paths. 66 million years. Keep an eye on that number, because by the end of this, something's going to come out of the Montana dirt that, by the rules in the textbook, shouldn't exist. But first, the dragons. Almost every culture that ever picked up a chisel or a brush, scattered clear across the planet with no way to compare notes, have all described the same family of creature. Big reptiles. Some that flew, some that swam, some that stalked around upright on two legs, some that lumbered on four. Different in the details, but unmistakably the same kind of thing. The Chinese have the long, their dragon, woven so deep into the culture that it still rides on temple roofs and gets its own year on the calendar. And here's an interesting little tidbit. The Chinese zodiac runs on 12 animals: rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, pig. 11 animals you could go photograph this afternoon. And then, slotted right in among them, equal billing, no asterisk or anything, is the dragon. The people who built that calendar didn't seem to think that they were mixing 11 real animals with one bedtime story. It's more like a day in the countryside. But what about the other side of the world? The Welsh put a red dragon on their flag and never blinked. The Norse had a serpent so big it wrapped the whole earth. The Greeks had Drakon, which just meant a great serpent, the thing Hercules and Jason were forever fighting. Mesopotamia carved a scaly clawed beast they called the Mushushu into the gates of Babylon. The Aztecs had the feathered serpent. Australia, India, Persia, Ethiopia. Different languages, different gods, different centuries. The same kind of creature keeps strolling through town. And every time, it's more or less the same build. Reptile, scales, a long neck or a long tail or both. Big teeth. Sometimes wings, sometimes horns, sometimes a frill or a row of spikes down the back. Now ask yourself a simple question. If you sat 100 strangers in 100 locked rooms and told each of them, make up a monster, would they all draw the same monster? Of course not. You'd get 100 different monsters. Squid people, funny things with 6 eyes, creatures made of fog. What you wouldn't get, 100 times over, is the same scaly reptilian blueprint. That's not how imagination works. Imagination scatters. This did the opposite. It kept converging on the same kind of animal, a reptile. So one of two things is going on. Either there's something hardwired into the human brain that makes all of us everywhere doodle the identical lizard, or a great many people were drawing from life. And I gotta say, I'm leaning toward the latter, because they didn't treat the dragon like a story they invented. They treated it like an animal they were cataloging. They wrote it down in the same books with the same straight face as the elephant and the crocodile. Look at the word people actually used. For almost the whole span of human history, when somebody dug up a giant horned skull or tried to put a name on a huge reptile, they reached for one word: dragon. The word dinosaur wasn't even an option because it didn't exist yet. We owe that one to an English anatomist named Richard Owen, who coined it in 1842 while he was staring at a handful of giant fossil bones and realizing they belonged to a group with no name: Dinosauria. Greek for fearfully great lizards. That word is younger than the bicycle. So every cave painter, every Roman, every medieval monk who ever described one of these animals did it long before anyone said dinosaur. They already had their word, and it had been doing a great job for thousands of years. And in the early days of the new science, even the experts kept sliding back to it. Dragon and dinosaur got used almost interchangeably for years. In parts of China, fossil bones were pulled out of the ground and sold as dragon bones, ground into medicine, long before any Western scientist arrived with a Latin label. They weren't being superstitious. They dug up an enormous reptile, and they called it the enormous reptile they already had a name for: a dragon. And I get that the names aren't the same everywhere. The European words share one root. Our word dragon runs back through the Latin Draco to the Greek drakon, and drakon just meant a great serpent, a real one, not a fairy tale. So inside Europe, that resemblance is plain old linguistics. But step outside that language family to people who never traded a single letter with the Greeks, and they still had a word for the very same animal. China had the long. The Norse had the worm. Culture after unrelated culture, each one carrying its own private word for a giant reptile, and every one of them translating in the end to the same idea. The sound of the words didn't always match, but the creature always did. And some of the people writing down their descriptions of these creatures weren't spinning fairy tales. They were the scientists of their day. Take Herodotus, 5th century BC, the man who basically invented historical record keeping and a stickler about separating what he saw from what he was told. He writes that he traveled to a place in Arabia specifically to investigate reports of winged serpents. He doesn't claim he saw a live one, but he writes plainly that he saw their bones. Heaps of them. Spines piled so thick that he couldn't count them, scattered across a mountain pass that opens toward Egypt. Now, that's a claim, not a confirmed fact, and the boring explanation is that he wandered into a field of dead locusts and got told a story. Probably. But notice the texture. He went, he looked, he logged the bones like a field report. Then there's Pliny the Elder, a Roman naval commander, naturalist, and the man who wrote a 37-volume encyclopedia of the entire natural world, and then died sailing toward an erupting Vesuvius to get a better look, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how dedicated this guy was. And in that encyclopedia, right between the elephants and the snakes, he writes that Africa breeds elephants, but it's India that produces the largest, along with a dragon, which is forever at war with the elephant. Then he describes the fight. The dragon drops down out of a tree, wraps the elephant's legs, the elephant topples and crushes it, and the two of them die together. He files the dragon under animals, same shelf as the lion. And the word never actually left science. There's a real lizard genus today called Draco, little gliding lizards in Southeast Asia. And the largest lizard alive on the planet, 10 feet of it in Indonesia. We didn't name it the Komodo monitor. We named it the Komodo dragon. The word was too useful to retire. And the reports of these things didn't just stop way back in the ancient past. An Arizona paper called the Tombstone Epitaph ran a story in 1890 about two ranchers who supposedly shot a giant winged thing out in the desert. Now, That one probably never happened. Frontier Papers made it a really bad habit to print tall tales to move copies. File it under fun, not proof. But notice the reflex, even in 1890. Something big and winged and reptilian turns up, and it lands in the exact shape people have been calling a dragon for 3,000 years. Now, the skeptics will tell you, and with good reason, that words can be stretched in the retelling. And that's a totally fair point. But carvings are harder to wave off, chiseled into stone gates and bishops' tombs, and a couple of them are sitting in museums you could visit this week. Let's start in Babylon. Around 575 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar builds the Ishtar Gate, a blue tiled gateway into the city, and lines it with rows of animals in relief. Two of them are easy: lions and aurochs, the giant wild cattle that really existed and really went extinct. Normal animals. And marching in the same rows, same style, a third creature, the mushushu. Scaly body, long neck, a forked tongue, horns, the front legs of a cat, the back legs of a bird. The German archaeologists who excavated the gate could never get past the fact that the Babylonians lined their mystery beast right up next to the lion and the aurochs, like it belonged there, like they had seen all three. Now go to Cambodia, to a temple called Tapram, the one strangled by giant tree roots that you've seen in the movies. Built in the late 1100s, the walls covered in little carved medallions of animals, monkeys, parrots, water buffalo, deer, things you'd see walking around Cambodia. And tucked into one of them, a squat four-legged animal with a row of distinct plates running along its arched back. It looks, for all the world, like a stegosaurus. But let's be real, the skeptics have decent points here. The plates could be decorative leaves. The head is too big for a real stegosaurus, and the famous tail spikes are missing. That's fair, except every other animal in those medallions is something the carvers could actually see. A deer is a deer, a monkey's a monkey. They carved from life. So why, in that one slot, invent a reptile that happens to match an animal Western science wouldn't name for another 700 years? Maybe it's foliage, or maybe somebody saw something. And it's not just the far side of the world. There's a cathedral in Carlisle, England, with a tomb right in the floor, because they used to think that was a good idea, of a bishop named Richard Bell, who died in 1496. The spot in the floor where the tomb is framed with brass strips. Those strips are engraved with a band of perfectly ordinary animals: fish, a bat, a dog, and in among them, two long-necked, long-tailed creatures with their necks crossed that look an awful lot like a pair of sauropods on a bishop's grave in England in 1496. Now, I have to put up a guardrail because this is exactly where people lose their minds and start believing everything. But you can't do that. The whole category of this is straight up fake. The Ica stones out of Peru, hundreds of rocks engraved with men riding dinosaurs, were carved by a local farmer who eventually admitted he made them. The Acambaro figurines out of Mexico, same story. When somebody waves a rock at you with the caveman galloping along on a triceratops, your scam detector should be screaming. That's not archaeology, that's the Flintstones. But you can't throw out the Ishtar Gate. You can't throw out a real bishop's tomb. And that brings us to the single best objection the skeptics have, the one that's supposed to end the whole conversation in a sentence. But does it though? A skeptic will give you every other point in this episode. The carvings, the old writers, the sightings, all of it, and then plant their feet on this one thing to prove that dragons are impossible. Picture the classic Western dragon for a second, like the one on the Welsh flag. 4 legs planted on the ground, and then a whole separate pair of wings rising up off the back, just behind the front legs. 4 legs plus 2 wings is 6 limbs, and there has never been a 6-limbed vertebrate animal. Yeah, there are insects with many more creepy legs, but not one animal with a backbone. Birds, bats, every flying creature that has ever lived had to give up a pair of arms to grow its wings. So a four-legged dragon with two extra wings bolted on the top can't be real. Well, hang on a second, because there's an animal that solves this little dilemma, and we have its skeleton, the Harpactognathus, a flying reptile, also known as a pterosaur. For the longest time, nobody could work out how the things even walked until the fossil footprints turned up and settled it. They walked on all fours. And here's the part that matters. A pterosaur's wing isn't an extra limb. The whole wing rides on one ridiculously long finger coming off the front hand. The wing and the front leg are the same arm. So when the animal lands and starts to walk, that giant finger folds backward and the wing folds up and tucks up out of the armpit and stands above the shoulder. Now, set that pterosaur down beside the Welsh dragon in your head. 4 feet on the ground. A pair of folded wings standing up just behind the front legs. Same silhouette, beat for beat. And the 6-limb problem just falls apart because it never was 6. It was 4 limbs and a pair of folded wings that grow straight out of the front pair, exactly where every old dragon drawing puts them. Now, I'm not telling you that a Welsh knight watched a pterosaur fold up its wings and ran home to design a flag. But the one thing skeptics swear is flat out anatomically impossible turns out to be the most natural standing pose in the world for an animal we know walked this planet. So that's the wings. Now, peel the skin off the rest of the dragon and see what's left. Because we've been hauling that skeleton out of the ground for 200 years, and we keep giving it the same name. In 2004, 3 amateur hunters digging in the Hell Creek Badlands of South Dakota pull a skull out of the ground. A showstopper. Long snout, a crown of horns, knobs and spikes and bumps all over it. When the scientists at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis get a hold of it, they didn't reach for some dry Latin description. They named it, officially in the scientific literature, Dracorex hogwartsia, the Dragon King of Hogwarts. They named a real dinosaur after a fairy tale dragon and a wizard school. And J.K. Rowling herself signed off and said she was thrilled because they looked at that skull and the most honest word for it was dragon. When Western science finally needed a label for these animals back in 1842, it built itself a brand new word, dinosaur. And it felt clean and clinical and modern. But listen to what the word actually says. Danos, meaning terrible or fearfully great. Sauros, lizard, a huge, fearsome lizard. Now, set that next to drakon, the old Greek word we started with, a great serpent. Strip the fancy labels off both of them, and you're standing in front of the same animal, an enormous, frightening reptile. So when the West thought it was inventing something brand new, all it really did was take the ancient idea and run it through Greek and Latin. Same creature, newer paperwork. And on the other side of the world, China didn't even bother with that much. They already had a word that fit. They'd used it for thousands of years, back when they dug these bones up and sold them as dragon bones. So their scientists just kept it. Long, dragon. Guanlong, the crown dragon. Dilong, the emperor dragon. Yinlong, the hidden dragon. One side renamed the monster, and the other never stopped calling it what it always was. And every so often, even our side feels the pull. That skull from a couple minutes ago, the one with the crown of horns. The team that named it reached right past the usual lizard names and landed on Dracorex, the Dragon King. And it's not just the names, it's the build. We picture dinosaurs as those clean, smooth, gray museum models. That picture is falling apart. Kentrosaurus had a double row of long spikes down its back and tail. Styracosaurus had a fan of horns coming off its skull like a crown. Triceratops, that giant bony frill. Sauropods, the big, gentle, long-necked ones we always drew as smooth, actually had rows of spines running down the neck and back, some of them almost a foot long. And we found dinosaur skin impressions covered in pebbly reptilian scales. So put the flesh back on. Scales, horns, spikes down the spine, a frill, a long neck, a long whipping tail, big teeth. I'm describing fossils. But read that list back to any D&D fanatic and they'll tell you exactly what you just described. A dragon. Now, to keep myself honest, here's the counterweight. The Dracorex skull, a lot of paleontologists now think it's not even its own species. They think it's a teenager. A juvenile Pachycephalosaurus that hadn't grown his dome yet. Which, if anything, I find perfect. Even our science can't stop describing these animals as dragons, and then it turns out the dragon was a baby. Anyway, so we have the writing, the carvings, and the skeletons that look like dragons. And every bit of that's old, which leaves the one objection still standing. The big one, the one your science teacher would lead with. Fine, dragons and dinosaurs look alike. So what? The dinosaurs all died 66 million years ago, and humans showed up a sliver of a second ago on that clock. The two never met. Nobody saw anything. Case closed. Strong argument, really is. But before you sign off on it, watch how many times that exact confidence that we already know the answer has been just plain wrong. The coelacanth, a big, heavy, lobe-finned fish with a face only a mother could love. We only knew it from fossils, and the fossils stopped about 66 million years ago, the same extinction that supposedly took the dinosaurs. So science filed it under extinct, gone with the dinosaurs. Closed book. Until December of 1938, when a boat off the coast of South Africa hauled one up in a net, alive. A museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer spotted it on the dock. The animal that had been dead for 66 million years was sitting on a pile of fish, dripping. It had been living down deep where nobody was looking the whole time. The next one is even more on the nose because it's literally called a dragon. The Komodo dragon, 10 feet of armored, venomous, flesh-eating lizard. For years, sailors and islanders talked about a giant land crocodile out on these Indonesian islands, and science smiled politely and assumed they were exaggerating. Until around 1910, when a Dutch officer went out, found one, and brought back proof. The locals had been right the whole time, the experts wrong the whole time, and that gap lasted for centuries. And the giant squid, the kraken. Sailors swore for hundreds of years that there was a tentacled monster big enough to wrestle a ship, and for hundreds of years, that was a drunken sailor story. Until the bodies started washing up. We had a Latin name and a slot in the textbook for the thing before anybody managed to photograph one alive in 2004 or capture it on film in 2012. So here's the point. The list of the animals that got laughed off as myth, then quietly turned out to be real, is long, and it keeps getting longer. The gorilla was a native legend that explorers scoffed at until it wasn't. The platypus was dismissed as a hoax stitched together by a taxidermist until it wasn't. Over and over, the same thing. Local people say a thing is out there, and experts say no, and one day somebody drags it onto a dock, which makes me a great deal less comfortable laughing at the people who say right now, today, that there's a dragon in the swamp. And there are far more of them than you'd ever guess. Because the reports never actually stopped. That's the part that surprises people. We filed dragon sightings under knights and monks, something that ended a long time ago. But they run right up through the 20th century and into this one. And even if you gather the modern accounts, just the last 50 years of them, something jumps out. They don't describe one creature. They sort themselves, almost on their own, into the same handful of shapes we've been talking about all along. The long-necked one, the flyers, the serpents. Same families, still walking through the door. Start with the long-necked ones because they have the deepest paper trail. Go to the Congo. The Likawala swamp region in the north of the Republic of the Congo is a piece of country roughly the size of Florida, and the government there has called something like 80% of it unexplored. There are still corners of this planet nobody has ever walked on. And out of that swamp, for as far back as the records go, come stories of an animal the locals call Mokele Mbembe.
Yamimbi means Yamimbi.
The name means roughly the one who stops the flow of rivers. They describe it in the same way over and over. Bigger than an elephant, a long snaking neck with a small head and a heavy tail. Lives in the water, eats plants, and will demolish a canoe if it gets too close. In 1980 and 81, a biologist from the University of Chicago named Roy Mackal led expeditions in to chase it down. And if you're of a certain age, a scientist wading into a swamp to hunt a living dinosaur comes with its own Saturday morning theme song, whether you want it to or not.
To the land of the lost.
Sleestack not included. And the thing that stuck with him was this. He showed the local people who had never been to school and never seen a dinosaur book a stack of animal pictures. Hippos, elephants, rhinos, the works. And when they hit the drawing of a sauropod, the long-necked dinosaur, the people pointed and said, "That one. That's Mokele Mbembe." Independently, from villages that didn't talk to each other. They kept picking the Brontosaurus out of the lineup. Now, I gotta be fair. Dozens of expeditions have gone into that swamp over the last 100 years. Dozens. And not one of them has come back with a body, a bone, or a clear photograph. A Danish team went in a few years back with a DNA scientist and came out having discovered a new species of algae, but no dinosaur. And there's a real criticism that the sauropod idea got planted in people's heads by the outsiders who kept showing them dinosaur pictures in the first place. Both of those things are true and they matter. That's testimony, not proof. And I'll keep saying it. But a century of the same long-necked description from people with no reason to coordinate in a place that's mostly blank on the map isn't nothing. It's not proof, but it's not nothing. And Mokele Mbembe has buddies. Out of the same swamps come reports of a thing the locals call the killer of elephants. Elephant size, gray, with a single long horn on its snout and a heavy tail. Inevitably, people compare it to a triceratops. The official answer is an unknown rhino. Maybe. Although notice what that answer is quietly asking you to swallow. To make one uncaught animal disappear, you have to conjure up a second uncaught animal to take its place. There are reports of another one seen only in the water with a row of big plates standing up along its back, which of course gets compared to a stegosaurus. Take all of that as loosely as you like. I do. But notice the shapes these people keep reaching for. The long neck ones, the horned one, the plated one, the same body plans again and again from people who have never set foot in a museum. And it's not only Africa. In early 1995, a group of geology students in the mountains of eastern Brazil reported watching two long-necked animals, maybe 30 feet each, wading in the shallows of a river. One account, one place, easy to set aside. But it's the same animal the Congo keeps describing, on a different continent, from people who weren't out looking for it. Then, there are the flyers. And this is where I have to be the most careful because the flyers are the easiest to get wrong. Out on Umboy Island in Papua New Guinea, the locals describe a creature they call the ropen. Leathery wings, no feathers, a long tail. And strangely enough, it glows. They say it crosses the night sky lit up for 5 to 6 seconds at a stretch. A cryptozoologist named Jonathan Whitcomb went there in 2004 and interviewed islanders who were adamant it wasn't a bat, that it roosts upright on the trees instead of hanging upside down, and that it glows. Over in Central Africa, they have their own version, the Kangamato, the overturner of boats. with the same leathery wings and a beak full of teeth and a habit of going after fishermen. Now, I gotta play devil's advocate for a minute and let you know that there is a good, rational candidate for the Kangamato, and it's a bird, the shoebill stork. 8 feet of wingspan, a huge, heavy, almost reptilian head, and it lives in exactly those swamps. Seen at dusk, low over the water, by somebody who's never laid eyes on one, a shoebill could pass for a small pterosaur. And maybe that's what's happening. However, it's not the slam dunk that skeptics think it is, because the bird explanation skates right past 2 things. The shoebill has no teeth, and it has no long tail. And the creature these people keep describing on 2 different continents has both a mouthful of teeth, a long trailing tail. So the bird covers the fuzzy shape in the dark and quietly deletes the 2 details the witnesses actually describe. That's not explaining the sighting. That's trimming the sighting down until it fits the answer you walked in with. And the reports don't stay in faraway swamps either. They're all over the United States. In 1982, an ambulance driver near Los Fresnos, Texas, said a featherless thing with a 5 or 6 foot wingspan and almost no neck crossed in front of him. And the only word he had for it was pterosaur. In 2017, 2 separate Texas reports, one near Houston, one in Irving, described a big black flyer with a long tail and a crest on its head. In 2021, 2 neighbors in a Chicago park said they watched a dragon-like creature pass over their yards in broad daylight. And just in the last couple of years, there have been clusters in Hawaii, Ontario, and North Carolina. The same featherless thing, the same crest on the head, the same long tail with a diamond on the tip. There is one big problem with the flyers, though. People are terrible at judging the size of something in the sky. A great blue heron, a wood stork, a sandhill crane, a big turkey vulture with nothing beside it for scale can look enormous and prehistoric, especially for the half second most of these sightings last. That probably covers most of them. Probably. But it's a funny kind of coincidence that the misjudged bird people keep landing on always has the same parts. No feathers, a crest, a long tail. The pterosaur. Never something that could be an eagle. And then there are the ones that are the opposite of the flyers. The serpents. In March of 2001, in Powys, Wales, a British naturalist and a few colleagues were out doing field work near a quarry when, by their account, a creature about 2.5 feet long came undulating through the air, serpentine style. 4 little limbs and a head shaped like a seahorse. It wove in a slow circle about 10 feet above the ground for 3 or 4 solid minutes while they stood there, and then slipped into a crack in the quarry wall. The naturalist, who had every professional reason to keep quiet about a thing like this, was adamant it wasn't a trick of the light and not a model. That it was alive. That it left him cold. Now, that's one man's account, a claim and not a confirmed fact. But isn't it interesting that it happened in Wales? The same Wales that has been flying a red dragon on its flag for centuries, in a stretch of country where the old folklore is full of small winged serpents living in the woods. The legend and the sighting are crawling around on the same patch of ground. Now, before you rush down to the comments to send me a video, let me stop you right there. This past January, a clip went viral of a white dragon supposedly captured at a secret government facility in China. Millions of views. People losing their minds over it. It's a fake. It's AI. Snopes traced it straight back to an account that had labeled it as AI generated in the first place before other people peeled that label off and passed it around as the real thing. Unfortunately, because we're living in a time when anybody can type one sentence and conjure a dragon, video evidence is worth just about squat now. Which, if anything, makes the old stuff matter more. The chiseled gate, the bishop's tomb, the witness who had no reason to lie back before a phone could lie for them. Which brings me to something that landed in my inbox while I was writing the script for this very episode. A longtime viewer named Dave S. wrote in, and I'm keeping the last names out of it for privacy, but he wanted to tell me what his wife Danielle saw. And the best part, besides his impeccable timing, is that his wife has never been into any of this. She doesn't know what a cryptid is, doesn't chase the weird. He's the one who watches the channel. She's the level-headed one. About 8 or 9 years ago, Danielle goes to the Ritz-Carlton in Naples, Florida, which is along the western Gulf side of Florida, for a friend's wedding. I actually helped put on a conference there in a past employment life. Nice place. Danielle's friends have good taste. One evening, about 6 o'clock, she's heading out the back of the hotel toward the beach to hang out with her friends, walking on a sidewalk with plants on either side. And about 10 feet in front of her, an animal walks out across the sidewalk. Maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, has a tail, and it's walking calmly at a normal pace, upright on its back 2 legs. She watches it for about 10 seconds before it slips off into the bushes on the other side of the sidewalk. When she got home, she didn't tell Dave, "I saw a monster." She said, "What kind of lizard walks around on its hind legs?" Dave was even kind enough to not only have Danielle write up her whole experience for us and send us pictures of where exactly at the hotel Danielle saw the creature, but also to sit down with her and recreate this AI sketch of what she saw. So for those listening on the podcast who want to know what this thing looked like, head over to YouTube for the video version. Now, there could be an easy explanation. South Florida is crawling with introduced reptiles, and there's a lizard down there, the brown basilisk, that does rear up and run on its back legs. They call it the Jesus lizard because it can sprint across the surface of the water. So, mystery solved. Maybe. Because a basilisk does that for a second or two. In a panic, a frantic little dash. It doesn't stroll across a sidewalk on 2 legs at a walking pace for 10 full seconds like the Geico lizard sipping tea.
Tasty.
That part doesn't fit the easy answer. And I trust Danielle as a witness precisely because she wasn't looking for anything. She didn't have a dragon on the brain. She just wanted to lay on the beach. She just watched a small, upright, tailed reptile take a walk, and it stuck with her for years. Maybe it was a basilisk having a strange day. Maybe it was somebody's escaped exotic pet. Or maybe, for 10 seconds on a sidewalk near Naples, an ordinary woman watched a very small version of the thing this whole episode has been circling. I can't tell you which. I can only tell you she isn't the type to make it up. All right. Before we get to the hard part, let me clear out the single silliest objection because I can feel it itching in the back of some of your heads. The fire. Come on, Carol Ann. Even if everything else lines up, no animal breathes fire. That part is pure fantasy. Is it though? Meet the bombardier beetle. Tiny little thing. And when something threatens it, it mixes 2 chemicals together in a little chamber in its rear end, and the reaction flashes that liquid up to about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling point of water, and fires it out in a hot, smoking chemical spray with an audible pop right at whatever is bothering it. A bug, walking around with a 2-chamber chemical weapon that shoots boiling smoke out of its butt. If I described that to you and didn't tell you it was real, you'd say I was inventing a tiny reverse dragon. And it's not alone. The electric eel runs a charge strong enough to drop a horse generated inside its own body without frying itself. Pit vipers see heat in the dark like a thermal scope built into the face. There's a lizard in the American Southwest that squirts its own blood out of its eyes to scare off predators. Nature is already doing things that sound more far-fetched than fire, none of which can be detected by just looking at their skeletons. So no, I'm not telling you dragons breathe fire, but the next time somebody uses fire as the reason the whole idea is impossible, Remember the beetle, which has been the quiet theme this entire time. That line between impossible and just not explained yet keeps sliding every time we look a little closer. And it's about to slide one more time in a lab with a bone that flat refuses to behave. I have to get serious now because this part isn't legend. It's published, peer-reviewed science, and it's been quietly making paleontologists very uncomfortable for about 20 years. It starts in 2005 with a scientist named Mary Schweitzer. She's working on a Tyrannosaurus rex pulled out of Montana, 68 million years old by the standard dating by calculating the age of the fossil layer. She does something to a piece of the leg bone, dissolves away the mineral, and what's left should be nothing, just stone. Instead, she finds soft tissue, flexible, stretchy blood vessels, little structures that look like cells, material that by every rule in the textbook should have rotted to nothing tens of millions of years ago. But wait, there's more. When they were digging these Hell Creek bones, some of them smelled like death, like a carcass. A veteran dinosaur hunter reportedly told them, "Oh yeah, all the Hell Creek bones smell like that." They'd been smelling it for years and just decided that it was normal for a 68 million year old rock. This is the part of the movie where somebody says,
"Life, finds a way."
Except that this isn't a movie and nobody's cloned anything. This is a peer-reviewed paper. Now, if it were only Schweitzer, one scientist, one bone, you could shrug it off as a fluke or a mistake. And plenty of people tried to, but it kept happening. Schweitzer's team went further and actually pulled protein sequences, collagen, out of a T-Rex and out of an 80 million year old duck-billed dinosaur, and the sequences came back matching a living reptile, the alligator. And then in 2015, a completely separate team over at Imperial College London went looking in 8 ordinary beat-up dinosaur bones, the scuffed-up stuff that gets tossed into the museum junk drawer. And in most of them, they found the same thing. Fibers that look like collagen, structures that look like red blood cells, with what appear to be nuclei. Their conclusion is the part that should perk your ears up. They said that this kind of preservation may not be rare at all. It might be common. We just never bothered to look at the cheap fossils. Then a team working in China and Taiwan reported collagen signatures in a rib from a fossil layer dated to 195 million years old. Lufengosaurus. Different lab, different countries, different dinosaurs. Soft tissue claims now running from 68 million years all the way back to 195 million. So this is no longer one woman with one strange bone. This is a pattern, and the pattern is the problem. Because here's what the same textbooks say about how long this material is supposed to last. Collagen is the toughest protein in bone, so it sets the bar. And the decay studies, run by mainstream scientists, are brutal about it. In a warm grave, the kind of climate that the Montana T-Rex was buried in, the models say detectable collagen should be gone in roughly 15,000 years. Not million, 1,000. One researcher put the half-life in that hot ground at 2,000 years. Cool it down to a steady 50 degrees and you do better, but you're still looking at a few 100,000 years before it's basically gone. Freeze it solid and pamper it, the most generous best case anyone will put in writing, and the ceiling is about 1 million years. 1 million. And the fossil layers we're talking about are dated to 68 million, 195 million. That gap isn't a rounding error. That's the protein lasting somewhere between 60 and 200 times longer than the absolute frozen best case limit. So something is wrong with one of the numbers. That's just logic. A thing can't be that fragile and that durable at the same time in the same bone. You can't fall apart in 15,000 years and also survive 68 million. One of those clocks is broken. So how do you fix it? Well, the main rescue is iron. The idea is that iron leaching out of the animal's own blood acts like a preservative, a natural embalming chemical, and locks the proteins in place so they resist the rot. That's the hypothesis, not a finding. And I want to be fair to it because maybe it helps a little. But consider the actual experiment behind it. They soaked ostrich blood vessels in a concentrated iron solution, and the vessels resisted decay for about 2 years on a lab shelf. 2 years. To get from a 2-year shelf life to 68 million years, you have to multiply by something like 30 million and just trust that the chemistry holds perfectly steady the entire time through heat, water, pressure, and geology. Nobody has shown that. They have shown 2 years. And there's another camp that says, look, maybe a lot of what we're calling original dinosaur tissue is just modern bacterial slime that crept into the bone. That's a real argument too, and it hasn't been fully settled either way. Except, here's my question for the bacteria camp. What bacteria in a buried bone has a collagen protein sequence that reads like a reptile's? So the honest state of things is this. We have soft tissue and proteins turning up in dinosaur bones again and again all over the world. We have a decay clock that says that's impossible past about 1 million years. We have a rescue mechanism demonstrated for 2 years and stretched across tens of millions. And we have an open fight about whether the tissue is even original. And notice how that timeline gets handed to you on a silver platter. 66 million years, stated flat in every textbook and every documentary with the kind of confidence you'd use for something we actually stood there and documented. But you don't get to be that sure while there's still soft tissue inside the bone that your own decay studies swear is impossible. Certainty. It's not the same animal as proof. And on this one, the certainty is running about 60 million years out ahead of the evidence. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a paleontologist. I'm also not here to tell you the Earth is young or old. I'm genuinely not interested in turning this into that fight. But I can read a contradiction. When your measurement says a thing should be long gone, and there it is anyway, still soft, still smelling, you don't get to just shrug and say the bone is being difficult. You're supposed to go back and check both clocks. The decay rate, the fossil layer dates, one of them is wrong. And so far, the official move has been to defend the fossil layer dating and explain away the bone. And here's what that does to everything we just spent 40 minutes on. Every single time a skeptic waved away a carving or a sighting or a dragon-faced skull, the trump card was always the same one. The dinosaurs were gone 66 million years before people showed up, so nobody could possibly have seen one. That card only works if the number behind it is solid. And that number has a bone-shaped crack running right through it. I'm not telling you people kept dinosaurs as pets.
Fetch the bone!
I'm telling you, the wall that made every dragon impossible isn't nearly as solid as the people leaning on it want you to believe. Pull the certainty out from under that timeline, and every dragon we have looked at today stops being a coincidence somebody has to explain away and starts being a question nobody has actually answered. So where does this leave us? Well, I can't prove a knight ever fought a dinosaur, and I won't pretend to. But when I lay it all out together, the coincidences stack into a pile that's kind of hard to ignore. The same kind of scary animals drawn by people who never met. A word for them on every continent, retired only when we finally invented a new one. Skeletons that look like dragons with the skin off. Carvings of them sitting calmly beside the lions and the deer. Living cousins we swore were myths right up until they landed on a dock. And tissue inside bones that's still somehow soft. Maybe every piece of that has a tidy, separate, boring explanation. Maybe. But that's a lot of maybes, all pointing in the same direction. And whatever you decide, do me one small favor. Be a little more suspicious of the people who are absolutely certain. Certain the dragon was only ever a fairy tale. Certain the timeline is closed down to the last million years. Because that same certainty looked at a fish that had supposedly been dead for 66 million years and called it extinct while it's still out there swimming around. It laughed at the islanders pointing at their dragon right up until the thing bit somebody. Did the entire human race across every age and every continent invent the exact same family of monster out of thin air by accident again and again? Maybe. Or maybe our modern day arrogance has blinded us to the evidence left by our ancestors in their caves and their temples and their swamps, showing us the truth the whole time. Gotta admit, this one's really got me thinking. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little ticked off I haven't heard about the soft tissue in the dinosaur bones before, even though the paleontologists have known about it for 20 years. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I kind of think this is something we should all know about by now. But if you made it this far and are not ready to throw in the strange and mysterious towel just yet, click here for another episode picked specifically for you. You're welcome. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.